Hey guys, today I'll show you a crime thriller TV series named Breaking Bad, Season 3. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Previously on the last season, we left off with Jesse devastated by the death of his love, Jane. Walter took him to a rehab center. Fortunately, Walter's surgery was a success, and his life was no longer in immediate danger. Jane's father, reeling from the loss of his daughter, had been suppressing his grief, which led to a fatal mistake at work, causing two planes to collide in a horrific accident that cost hundreds of lives. The plane crash became a widely known tragic event. Jane's father seemed to bear all the blame alone. However, Walter was not at peace with his conscience. He intended to burn the drug money, but couldn't bring himself to do it at the last moment. Just as he was retrieving the money from the swimming pool, he heard Hank's voice outside. Walter hurried to clean up. Hank, unaware of the conflict between Walter and his wife, came over to help with the move. Seeing Walter with a black bag piqued Hank's curiosity. Walter said the bag contained $500,000 in cash. His serious demeanor actually made Hank burst out laughing, thinking that Walter's optimistic spirit was commendable. The reason Walter dared to joke that way was based on his understanding of Hank. On the other side, Skyler had lost hope in Walter. She visited a law firm to seek advice on divorce matters. It was clear that Skyler not only wanted a divorce, but also intended to fight for custody of their two children. Their son, Junior, was still confused about the sudden separation, especially since it was his mother who initiated it and kicked his father out of their house. As a result, he harbored resentment towards Skyler. Although a week had passed since the plane crash, its impact was far from over. In response, the high school held a counseling session in the gymnasium, hoping to help the students move past their negative emotions. Walter didn't want to speak at the event, but the host passed the microphone to him. Walter encouraged everyone to forget the past and look to the future, noting that the fact there were no casualties on the ground was a miracle, and both planes were not fully occupied. His words seemed to console others, but they sounded more like excuses to ease his own conscience. During the separation from Skyler, Walter could only see his son, Junior. He drove him home as usual, only now it was to Marie's house. Junior hoped his mother would have a heart-to-heart talk with his dad, prompting Skyler to take the initiative to meet Walter, not to discuss their relationship, but to talk about the divorce. Walter was shocked when his wife presented the divorce papers. He couldn't believe Skyler was taking it so seriously to the point of cutting him off. He insisted he deserved a chance to explain himself, but before he could, Skyler coldly delivered her verdict, saying he is a drug dealer. Skyler was no fool. Walter could not possibly have had the money to pay for his medical expenses. Connecting the dots with the small-time dealer Jesse, she realized that her husband's repeated disappearances meant he was involved in drugs. But at this point, Walter had to admit it. He wanted to explain everything, indicating his actions were beyond his control. However, Skyler wanted to end things on the spot. She even proposed a deal. She wouldn't tell Hank or Junior about his drug dealing if Walter agreed to the divorce. After stating her terms, she left Walter's place, unwilling to stay even a second longer. Turning to Jesse, he stayed at the rehab center. More than the addiction itself, it was his inner turmoil that tormented him. He believed that he was responsible for Jane's death. At a meeting in rehab, the counselor used their own painful life experiences to explain that living with hatred only made things worse. Self-hatred and guilt achieve nothing. This soulful dialogue acted like a beam of light piercing into Jesse's dark depths. Before long, he successfully detoxed and left the center. Walter came to fetch him on the day he was released. Jesse had learned from the news that the plane crash was caused by Jane's father's mishandling. Upon remembering this, he started to blame himself again. Walter tried to console him, even making up excuses, suggesting there might have been a problem with the plane's radar system. In essence, it was not Jesse's fault. However, Walter's explanations seemed more like excuses to himself, refusing to accept that it was a chain reaction triggered by his own actions. Early the next morning, Walter sought out Uncle Chicken, planning to end their partnership and retire from the criminal world once and for all. With his family torn apart, all Walter had left was money, and this was not the life he wanted. But Uncle Chicken offered a deal. If Walter agreed to cook meth for 3 more months, he would earn $3 million. It would be false to say he wasn't tempted by such a large sum, but ultimately Walter refused, reasoning he already had more money than he could ever spend. At that moment, Walter was unaware that a grave crisis was approaching. At the U.S.-Mexico border, a pair of murderous, bald brothers had appeared. They had smuggled themselves into the U.S. with Heisenberg as their target. They were tough and formidable, having taken many lives, killing a truckload of innocent civilians, and then burning the vehicle. That day, Walter was speeding down the highway when suddenly he was pulled over by a cop. Walter panicked a bit, but it turned out the cop had only noticed his cracked windshield and gave him a ticket for unsafe driving. Once Walter knew it had nothing to do with drugs, he flew into a rage. He had already explained that the damage was from a plane crash. Why should he still get a ticket? The cop was taken aback by Walter's pushback, and as he grew more agitated, the cop had to use pepper spray on him and then lock him in the police car. Deep down, Walter refused to admit that his own actions had caused the plane crash and his marriage to fall apart. He played the victim so that when the police held him accountable, he completely lost it. Over with DEA agent Hank, he had taken notice of the terrible act committed by the Bald brothers at the border. Technically, it was a Border Patrol matter, not Hank's concern. But Hank's sharp instincts told him that since the crime occurred at the border, it's possible someone had illegally crossed into the U.S. Worth mentioning is that whether it's the border tragedy or the blue meth case, there's only one key figure, the hidden drug lord Heisenberg. No matter which case Hank focused on, he would inevitably suspect Walter. Just then, Hank got a call from the station and found out Walter had been arrested. He rushed to bail him out, knowing full well the complexity of family disputes and not understanding why Skyler was so adamant about divorcing Walter, even keeping the kids from him. During this time, the lawyer Saul got wind of Walter turning down Uncle Chicken's $3 million offer, and so he paid a visit to Walter. He reassured Walter that Skyler wouldn't go to the cops because if Walter's drug dealing came to light, everyone would be implicated, especially Hank, who had no idea his brother-in-law was a kingpin. Some might even believe Hank was covering for him, risking his job, and Skyler could be taken away as an accomplice, while Junior would be devastated by his mother turning in his father, destroying his world. Skyler surely understood the stakes, so whatever she said was just bluffing. However, that wasn't Walter's main concern. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his family. After all, the whole point of his descent into the criminal underworld was to provide for his family. But in the money-first eyes of Saul, this was no big deal. He turned around and contacted the trouble fixer, Mike, instructing him to keep a close eye on Skyler's every move. The relationship between Junior and his mother hit rock bottom. Junior believed that his mother was sabotaging his relationship with Walter since his father no longer drove him home. When Junior saw his father at school with red eyes, he mistakenly thought he had been crying all night out of sadness. Seeing Skyler remain indifferent, Junior lost his temper and called his mother a terrible name. Hank tried to persuade Skyler to let the children see their father, but Skyler shut him down as soon as he brought it up. Afterwards, Hank was sure that Walter's erratic behavior was due to his cancer and a midlife crisis which led to an affair. But Marie suspected it was more complicated. If it were a simple affair, Skyler would have confided in her. The lack of disclosure suggested something more serious. Unbeknownst to them, Jesse had successfully been sober for 45 days. According to Walter's promise, if he managed to stay clean, he would get his share of the drug money. That day, Jesse planned to ask Saul for the money. When he drove past his aunt's house, he saw his parents renovating it to sell. His father, seeing Jesse's healthy appearance, guessed he hadn't touched drugs for a while. However, when Jesse asked to look inside his room, his father declined. Even though Jesse had changed, his father wasn't ready to welcome him back. Jesse left feeling awkward. Saul, after seeing Jesse, hoped he could convince Walter to reconsider, but instead, Jesse pulled out a stack of cash, offering Saul a job. The next morning, Saul called a meeting with Jesse's parents in the conference room. He wanted to buy their house on behalf of a client, offering to pay in cash. As for who the client was, he couldn't disclose. The job Jesse gave him was to buy this house. It was listed online for more than $800,000, but Saul offered a flat $400,000. Jesse's parents were ready to walk away, suspecting Saul was lowballing them because he knew something they didn't. As they were about to leave, Saul revealed the house's history of drug manufacturing. Jesse's parents had kept this detail out of the listing to preserve the house's value. Saul made it clear, sell at the low price or never sell at all. Pressured, Jesse's parents had to compromise. A few days later, Jesse came back to his aunt's house, and only when he pulled out the keys did his parents realize that he had bought the house. They never expected to be outmaneuvered by their own son. The Bald brothers arrived at a nursing home. It wasn't long before a familiar figure appeared. It was the uncle of the drug dealer, Tuco. The Bald brothers were Tuco's cousins and were sent to seek vengeance for Tuco's death from Heisenberg. They quickly found out Walter's real name through a spelling game. This put Walter in new danger. During this time, Skyler was overwhelmed. Not only were there personal issues at home, but work was also going awry. She discovered that her boss was blatantly evading taxes. She couldn't help but question how he would explain this to his children when they grow up. The boss responded that if he had to give an answer, it would be that he did everything for them, although he hadn't thought that far ahead. Just surviving was draining enough. If only Skyler could put herself in Walter's shoes, she might understand why he cooked meth. Soon, Skyler received a call from Walter, learning that Junior had shown up alone, seeking to see his father. But Walter wasn't planning to enjoy this hard-won father-son time and was determined to send him back personally. The poor son was used again, asking his father what was going on, but Walter deflected, telling his son not to worry, assuring him that a parent's love for their child never changes. To appease Skyler, Walter bought a pizza, hoping to talk things over with her, perhaps even reconcile, but she was unforgiving, not even letting him in the door. Rebuffed, Walter threw the pizza on the roof in frustration. Back at his place, Walter drowned his sorrows in alcohol. The next morning, he heard Skyler's voicemail in a drunken haze. She had found the pizza on the roof and urged Walter to get a grip on himself, accept reality, or face a restraining order. Hearing this, Walter sobered up. If being nice didn't work, he'd have to be tough. So he packed his bags and went home, intending to move back in by force. Meanwhile, the trouble fixer Mike had already sneaked into the yard, discreetly installing a bug to prevent Skyler from revealing Walter's meth production. With changed locks and sealed windows, Walter had to find another way in, but he managed to enter the house. As Mike was preparing to leave, a suspicious vehicle pulled up. It was the Bald brothers, gloved and armed with axes, heading straight for Walter's home to seek revenge. Upon seeing this, Mike quickly made a call, but on the other end was not his employer Saul, but Uncle Chicken. Walter was comfortably showering, oblivious to the dangerous visitors waiting in his home, ready to strike as soon as he got out. Just then, the Bald brothers received a text message showing the name of the chicken restaurant. It seems that the Bald brothers knew Uncle Chicken, who helped Walter avert a crisis. When Walter finished his shower, the Bald brothers had already left with their bald heads. Still, Walter sensed the intrusion. He had narrowly escaped death again. After moving back in, Walter cleaned up the pizza from the roof. Soon, Skyler returned home from work with their daughter. Before she could even park the car, she saw Walter and didn't even want to have a face-to-face conversation with him. She left and called Walter, demanding that he leave immediately. Walter flat out ignored her request. Skyler then began to threaten to call the police if he didn't leave, but this tactic also proved ineffective. Walter calmly stated that he had nothing left to fear, having already lost his home. Of course, Walter didn't genuinely believe that. He knew that Skyler would keep the secret, not for his sake, but for their sons. Skyler did indeed call the police, but on the phone, she didn't reveal her husband's drug-making activities. She only reported that her ex-husband was harassing her sexy body. At this moment, Junior returned home from school, delighted to see his father back. However, his happiness was shattered by the arrival of the police. For Junior, having his father thrown out of the house was outrageous enough, and now his mother was calling the police on him, leaving him speechless. The mother and son were on the brink of another huge argument. Although Skyler had her reasons, she couldn't disclose them. Junior looked up to his father, and the truth about Walter's drug-making would be too much for his young mind to handle. Skyler hoped to use a harassment charge to get the police to remove Walter, but they weren't divorced, and Walter hadn't committed any domestic violence. As for the house, it was joint property. In short, the police had no valid reason to evict anyone. To Skyler's dismay, Walter knew how to play his cards right. He comforted his crying daughter, holding her and feeding her formula, the picture of a caring, devoted father. With no other option, Skyler had to endure the situation. After Jesse wrestled the house back from her parents, he didn't find himself living a happy life. Instead, he spent her days lost in longing for Jane. The thing he did most was to repeatedly dial Jane's number just to hear the familiar voicemail greeting. What really twisted the knife was that Jane's phone service had been canceled by the telecom company for not topping up her account. Now, Jesse was completely devoid of joy. Having lost all his emotional anchors, he shockingly turned back to his old ways and began making drugs on his own. On Hank's end, his superior sent him back to the border's drug enforcement agency. The last incident with the decapitated turtle had left him with panic attacks. He should have refused the assignment, but Hank was too proud to show weakness. Not only did he accept the mission, but he also pretended to be thrilled about it in front of his partner. To bolster his courage, Hank took his partner to a seedy bar known for its drug dealer clientele. He intentionally ditched his partner and, without a word, picked a fight with two menacing-looking thugs. Hank quickly subdued them with his muscles. As other hooligans seemed ready to jump in, Hank revealed his DEA badge, which naturally made them back off. Afterward, the Bald brothers took Tuco's uncle to a chicken farm on the outskirts of town, which served as a base for Uncle Chicken's breeding operations. They were accompanied by a high-ranking member of a Mexican drug cartel. It was evident that the Bald brothers were cousins of Tuco and were set on avenging Tuco's death. The territory in the U.S. belonged to Uncle Chicken, but he had a cooperative relationship with the Mexican drug cartel. Although Walter hadn't agreed to Uncle Chicken's offer to cook for 3 more months, Uncle Chicken seemed confident. Therefore, Walter had to stay alive for the time being. Out of respect for Uncle Chicken, the cartel agreed to give some time to settle the matter. As for whether the Bald brothers could restrain themselves from killing Walter, that was not guaranteed. Walter may have moved back home, but his relationship with Skyler had become even more strained. He couldn't even use the bathroom. Frustrated, Skyler went to see her divorce lawyer and complained about Walter's insistence on moving back in despite her objections. The lawyer, aware of Skyler's unspoken troubles, offered to sign a confidentiality agreement, promising that everything discussed would be kept confidential. Skyler finally revealed Walter was cooking meth but not selling it. But Skyler had another reason for keeping the secret from their son. Walter was a terminal cancer patient and didn't have many years left. She figured that once he died, the secret would be buried with him. The next morning, Skyler was getting ready for work when she discovered a bag full of cash left at her doorstep. Walter had brought all the drug money to her, confessing everything. He did this to ensure that she and the children would be financially secure after his death. Walter hoped Skyler would accept this money, seeing it as his sacrifice for the family. If she refused, he felt his sacrifice would be for nothing. Walter's emotional outpouring seemed to Skyler like a moral ransom. He implored her to think it over and respond in the evening. However, Skyler wouldn't be swayed by his actions and would go as far as to make a bold move by flirting with her boss at the office. The boss, who had been longing for such a moment, immediately reciprocated. Skyler inquired whether the kids were home, hinting that if they weren't, they could take their conversation to the bedroom. It wasn't until nightfall that Skyler returned home, only to find Walter busying himself in the kitchen, still harboring the fantasy that his actions might have moved her. But Walter was unaware that he was already engulfed by an aura of forgiveness. Skyler approached Walter calmly, and in a steady voice uttered the words he dreaded most. She had slept with her boss. Walter was shell-shocked, frozen in disbelief. He tried everything to get Skyler to reconsider, not realizing she was determined to divorce. After finishing his drug production, Jesse drove away in the RV. It was only after fueling up at a gas station that he realized he had no cash on him, so he offered to pay with his manufactured blue meth instead. But the clerk had no concept of meth. Jesse described the experience as euphoric, almost irresistible to the clerk. Just then, a police officer walked into the store. The old Jesse would have hidden the meth and fled, but he was no longer his former self. As calm as an old dog, he showed no panic, and the clerk eventually accepted the meth as payment. Over at Saul's place, thanks to a bug, he learned about Skyler's affair with her boss. Walter and Skyler had a huge fight over it, but it seemed that even if being cuckolded, Walter wouldn't pack up and leave. As for the boss, Walter had no intention of letting him off the hook. Instead, he went directly to the company to confront him. Seeing trouble, the boss hid his smelly butt in his office and didn't dare show his face, which infuriated Walter to the point of throwing a potted plant at the glass wall, only to smash it in vain. The noise attracted everyone in the office to watch the commotion, leaving Skyler in utter embarrassment. Walter didn't get to see the boss and was kicked out by security. Just when Walter was gearing up to storm in again, a car suddenly pulled up beside him. Mike grabbed Walter, pulled him into the car, and took him to Saul's law office. Saul was still trying to persuade Walter to continue cooking meth. Saul argued that it's better for him to channel grief and anger from being cheated into power. At this point, Walter realized something was off, asking how he knew his wife cheated on him. Calming down, he surmised that someone must have bugged his house. Saul defended his actions as a necessary precaution to prevent Skyler from exposing Walter's meth production. Walter, already fuming, found a target for his anger in Saul, and they came to blows before Mike stepped in to separate them. Saul had to compromise and order Mike to remove all bugs from Walter's house. Mike did so, but left Walter with a thought. Sometimes being watched isn't a bad thing, apparently alluding to the revenge plot of the Bald brothers, something Walter was still oblivious to. Notably, as Mike drove away, he spotted a scythe symbol on the ground, seemingly a mark. It was left by the Bald brothers. Even though Uncle Chicken had interceded, it seemed the brothers hadn't abandoned their revenge plan, leaving the question of when they might come after Walter. Due to a recent upsetting incident, Walter couldn't concentrate in class. He just stood there at the podium, looking dazed, leaving his students confused. The principal noticed that Walter wasn't himself and called him into her office. However, Walter made the foolish mistake of making a pass at the principal. Perhaps he thought to retaliate against his wife in the same way she had wronged him, but the principal was no pushover. She not only rejected him but also put him on temporary leave. Walter packed up his things and left the office, only to see Jesse's car parked outside the school. Jesse showed the finished product to Walter, saying that he had already sent out some samples and the feedback was positive. Feeling a sense of pride, Jesse hoped Walter would introduce him to Uncle Chicken so that the drug distribution wouldn't be an issue in the future. Unexpectedly, Walter refused to help and berated Jesse, criticizing the quality of his meth and saying it wasn't up to standard. Even though Jesse promised he wouldn't use drugs again, Walter still discouraged him, stating that Uncle Chicken would never work with a drug user. Poor Jesse's self-esteem was mercilessly crushed by Walter. In the end, Jesse and Walter parted on bad terms. Skyler felt uncomfortable at work due to the earlier scene Walter caused at the company. She could sense her colleagues looking at her differently. However, she didn't sever her relationship with her boss. In fact, they were still intimate. The boss had feelings for Skyler and even hoped she would move in with him, but Skyler, not as invested in the affair, was more motivated by revenge against Walter and also considered her son's feelings, so she wouldn't agree to live with her boss. Agent Hank was once again assigned a task at the border by his superior. Despite feeling anxious, Hank toughed it out. On the day he was supposed to leave, Marie drove him to the airport. Just as he was about to depart, he received a call from the DEA saying that the blue meth, which hadn't been seen for a while, had surfaced again. In the end, Hank decided to skip his flight and continue investigating the blue meth case. It gave him a good reason not to go to the border. The blue meth was recently produced by Jesse as a test batch to check the quality. Hank tried to get clues from an addict, but the person was too incoherent to provide any useful information. Following a series of leads, Hank arrived at a gas station Jesse had previously visited. The attendant was terrified at the sight of a cop and tearfully described Jesse's appearance, which was unfortunately too common to be of much help. She also mentioned the make of Jesse's car, but since it was parked outside back then, she only noticed the color and nothing else. Just as Hank was about to leave, disappointed that the gas station's camera was just for show, an ATM camera caught his attention. It had captured Jesse's car. Although the license plate wasn't visible, there were only 29 cars of that model in the entire country. Hank was determined to track down each one until he found the right car. At this moment, Jesse was oblivious to the fact that he had already drawn the attention of the police. He approached Saul, hoping Saul could help him set up a meeting with Uncle Chicken. Saul agreed to assist when he realized Jesse was ready to strike out on his own. Uncle Chicken was initially biased against Jesse and was unwilling to work with him, that is until he found out that Jesse and Walter had split. This revelation caused Uncle Chicken to reconsider and agree to a partnership with Jesse. Jesse managed to sell the blue meth to Uncle Chicken as he intended, but he only received half of the money. The other half had gone to Walter, who was just as puzzled by this sudden windfall. Jesse was unaware that he was merely a pawn in Uncle Chicken's plan to coerce Walter back into drug production. By splitting the money, Uncle Chicken sent a clear message that Walter's retirement was not his decision alone. After Hank refused to go to the border, he focused all his efforts on investigating the RV. One evening, he and his partner zeroed in on a vehicle, which his partner doubted looked like a mobile drug lab. But Hank, determined to catch Heisenberg, insisted on investigating. To get a clear view inside, he climbed onto the vehicle's roof, only to find himself in an embarrassing situation. It was not a drug lab at all. Inside, a middle-aged couple was playing cards, scantily dressed. When the woman heard the noise on the roof, she hurled insults at Hank, calling him a perverted voyeur. A night stakeout yielded nothing, and Hank was nearly in legal trouble over the misunderstanding. Hank received another piece of disheartening news from his partner. Because he had declined the border assignment, the significant task had been passed to his partner, who was now in line for a promotion and raise. Exhausted, Hank went home to take a naked shower, and that's when Marie approached him. She knew the real reason behind his reluctance to go to the border. Hank had witnessed the carnage of his colleagues in the tortoise incident and was understandably frightened. However, Hank's pride prevented him from admitting his fear. He insisted that he couldn't manage both tasks and had to temporarily give up the border assignment to investigate the blue meth case. Walter was hiding in a closet on the phone. On the other end was none other than Jesse. Learning that Walter had taken half of the drug money, Jesse was furious and demanded the money back. Walter felt downcast as he listened to the accusations. He hadn't made any deals with Uncle Chicken. The money just fell from the sky while he was driving down the road. But Walter quickly saw right through Uncle Chicken's scheme to lure him out of retirement. With the money in hand, he angrily confronted Uncle Chicken. Walter thought Uncle Chicken could not really rely on Jesse. Surprisingly, Uncle Chicken responded that the meth Jesse had produced was indeed almost as good as Walter's. This infuriated Walter, who insisted that his disdain was not for Jesse, but out of respect for chemistry. In truth, Walter couldn't stand to see Jesse collaborate with Uncle Chicken. His pride wouldn't allow it. To continue persuading him, Uncle Chicken took Walter to a place that appeared to be a laundry business he owned, but it was hiding a secret. Underneath was a secret chemistry lab that Uncle Chicken had built. It was all Walter's if he wanted it. Before, Walter had to either drive an RV to desolate places to cook or use unsafe basements. Compared to those, this lab was the best place to produce drugs, equipped with advanced equipment. Uncle Chicken promised Walter that if he could produce 200 pounds a week for 3 months, he would earn $3 million. Faced with everything in front of him, Walter fought hard to suppress his inner desires and refused Uncle Chicken. He had started down the path of drug production for his family, but in the end, he lost them. Walter didn't want to continue making mistakes. Seeing this, Uncle Chicken told him a man's duty is to provide for his family. As long as the children are there, the home is there. Even if he was not understood or loved anymore, he still endured everything. Elsewhere, to avoid drawing attention, Skyler followed her boss to his doorstep. She was about to get out of the car when she suddenly received a call from Marie. Hank had been acting differently lately, working all hours, not eating, and was on the verge of collapse. Marie didn't know how to help Hank. She told Skyler that people who face death change a lot, just like Walter. Hearing this, Skyler froze, probably reflecting on her lack of empathy for Walter's change in attitude after his cancer diagnosis. That night, Skyler took the initiative to talk to Walter and asked him to hold their daughter. It was a small gesture, but it nearly moved Walter to tears. From Skyler's actions, it was clear her attitude had softened. The next morning, Walter left without a word unexpectedly, moving out with the drug money. What surprised Skyler even more was that Walter had already signed the divorce papers. Although it was the outcome she had always wanted, Skyler didn't feel happy about it. Clearly, Uncle Chicken's pep talk had had an effect. Walter, for the sake of his family, decided to step back onto the path of drug production. Jesse contacted Walter through Saul, looking to reach an agreement on profit sharing. Jesse proposed that from now on, he would give Walter a 10% cut of the profits from his drug manufacturing. At this point, Jesse was still unaware that Walter was about to make a comeback to the underworld. With an arrogant tone, Jesse mentioned that this money was charity for Walter. Walter returned the half of the drug money to Jesse and harshly advised him to enjoy it while he's young, as it would be his last jackpot in this line of work. Seeing Jesse clueless about the situation, Walter revealed that Uncle Chicken was only using him to find Walter, and now that Walter was joining, Jesse was out. Upon learning that Walter had resumed drug production, Jesse was stunned. When Saul heard this, he hoped to continue laundering money for him. Walter took the chance to reduce Saul's cut from the original 17% to 5%. After all, it was a $3 million job, and Saul eventually accepted. Walter warned Jesse never to use his formula again. Feeling exploited and enraged, Jesse stormed out of the office, and the first thing he did was pick up a rock and smash Walter's car. At the DEA, colleagues were hosting a farewell party for Hank's partner. Hank was not in a good place emotionally. Despite having investigated many RVs, he had come up empty-handed. Fortunately, a breakthrough came soon. Hank found Combo's mother's house, and when the door opened, it was Combo's mother who greeted him. Hank learned that she had lost a car a few months ago. She hadn't reported it stolen because she knew it was Combo who had taken it. Believing her son was not bad, she couldn't bear the thought of him going to jail. In Combo's room, Hank found a photo featuring not only Combo, but also Jesse. Perhaps Jesse's RV was the one Combo's mother had lost. In the past, Walter had given all his savings to Jesse to buy the RV. But after receiving the money, Jesse didn't buy the RV immediately. Instead, he partied at nightclubs with Combo and Skinny Pete, and the money was almost all spent. Unexpectedly, Combo claimed he could get a car at a low price. Later, they arrived at a house, and Jesse handed over the rest of the money to Combo, who then handed over the car keys. Jesse had always thought he had snagged a great deal on the vehicle, not knowing it was actually stolen by Combo. Given Hank's current progress, Jesse might be in danger. After leaving his home, Walter followed a real estate agent to view houses and took a liking to a fully furnished model home, indicating that money was not an issue. In the morning, Walter crafted a sandwich for breakfast, meticulously cutting off all the crusts. After dropping off his son at school, Walter headed to the lab to prepare for his first day of work. However, someone had already arrived before him. This man was named Gale, the new assistant sent by Uncle Chicken to work with Walter. Gale, who had heard of Walter's feats, greatly admired him. Yet Gale was no ordinary individual himself. He had graduated with a master's degree in organic chemistry and was a typical academic. Their collaboration could be described as a powerful alliance, with the drug production process running efficiently. During their breaks, the two would sip coffee and discuss academic matters. Walter was curious why Gale, a young and promising chemist, would choose to make drugs when he could have led a normal life. The truth was that Gale's motivation wasn't money, but a passion for chemistry. He couldn't stand the schmoozing and impurity of the science in other jobs, which is why he turned to the criminal path of drug production. As for the moral aspect, Gale had a theory that justified his actions. Addicts would always find a way to get drugs, so it might as well be from Uncle Chicken, where they could get the best quality. Meanwhile, Jesse, though abandoned by Walter and without support, didn't give up. He gathered Skinny Pete and Badger to discuss rebuilding their drug network. Learning from the tragic death of Combo, they decided not to be greedy and to sell their product discreetly. Little did Jesse know that Hank had already set his sights on him. Just as Hank was feeling frustrated, Marie called him, mentioning that to catch Jesse, he could ask for Walter's help. She was aware that Walter had bought some illegal substance from Jesse before, so Hank called Walter to ask if he had seen the RV when he bought the illegal substance, saying that this vehicle was used by Jesse for his mobile drug lab. Walter panicked, knowing that his fingerprints were all over the RV. He hurried to call Jesse, but then realized that if Jesse's phone was tapped, calling him now would be like signing his own death warrant. With the situation urgent, Walter had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He needed to take the RV to the junkyard to destroy all evidence. Badger secretly informed Jesse. Upon learning of Walter's plan to destroy the vehicle, Jesse thought Walter was out to eliminate him. Furious, he drove to the junkyard, not knowing that Hank was closely following behind. Walter handed the money to the junkyard owner and stayed in the RV for a moment longer to take one last look. This place had witnessed his first foray into drug production. Just then, Jesse burst into the RV, accusing him. Walter sensed trouble brewing as Hank was also approaching. In a panic, he pulled the curtains closed. Only then did Jesse realize the gravity of the situation. Trapped inside the RV, they were sitting ducks. With the doors and windows locked, Hank grabbed a tool, ready to pry the door open. At this juncture, the junkyard owner intervened, stalling for time. He pointed out that without a search warrant, Hank's forced entry or vehicle damage would be illegal. Jesse began to echo the words Walter had told him, defiantly stating that this was his private property and harassment wouldn't be tolerated. Hank retreated to his car to call his colleagues, asking them to bring the warrant over while he stayed put to keep a close eye on Jesse. Hank was confident that Jesse couldn't escape and was within his grasp. The current situation was causing Walter a great deal of stress, but he thought of a devious plan to extricate themselves from the predicament, a tactic he wouldn't resort to unless absolutely necessary. Knowing Hank well, Walter was aware that his greatest weakness was his wife, Marie. So, Walter called Saul for help. It wasn't long before Hank received a call from someone claiming to be a medical professional, stating that Marie had been in a car accident and was en route to the hospital, urging Hank to get there quickly. Because the caller described Marie's condition in detail, Hank left for the hospital without delay. Upon reaching the hospital, Hank was anxious, fearing that the drug traffickers were seeking revenge. It was at this moment that Hank received a call from Marie herself, and he suddenly realized he had been duped. He was so close to success, yet it slipped through his fingers at the last moment. Seeing Hank leave, Walter and Jesse immediately ordered the destruction of the RV. In a matter of moments, it was reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Watching the vehicle being obliterated was painful for both men because it was the loss of a tangible piece of their memories. Regardless, the crisis was averted. With no evidence left, it would be much harder for Hank to catch Jesse. Earlier at Uncle Chicken's place, the Bald brothers came to the fried chicken joint without a word or an order, pressuring Uncle Chicken to compromise. Without him, Walter would have been long gone. Uncle Chicken promised an answer by sunset and later drove alone into the wilderness to confront the Bald brothers face to face. Currently, Walter was busy with his meth operation, and murder was not an option. However, Uncle Chicken devised a plan to shift the Bald brothers' target to someone else, suggesting that although Walter had betrayed Tuco, it wasn't he who killed him, but the DEA agent, Hank. This revelation raises concerns for Hank, who is already miserable from failing to catch Jesse and is now on the radar of two formidable assassins. After the RV was destroyed, Jesse drove back home. Unable to swallow his pride, Hank confronted him directly. Knowing he had no evidence, Jesse consulted with his lawyer, Saul. Hank was furious, not only because he came back empty-handed, but also because he wondered how Jesse obtained personal information about Marie. Hank attempted to force the truth out with violence, but he went too far, knocking Jesse unconscious. After calming down, Hank regretted his impulsiveness and called an ambulance to take Jesse to the hospital. His superior demanded a statement from Hank to explain the incident. In the hospital, the battered Jesse finally woke up. Saul took a Polaroid of him, consoling him that his blood tests were clean, making him appear as a law-abiding citizen to outsiders. If the picture leaked, the public opinion could crush Hank. Saul suggested that the beating might not have been in vain. Walter visited the hospital, apologizing for Hank's actions. Jesse, however, was determined to not let Hank off the hook, vowing to sue and ruin him. Saul advised that the DEA was currently in the wrong and wouldn't provoke Jesse, but if Jesse persisted, they would have no choice but to retaliate, and if anything was discovered, it would be the end not only for Jesse, but for anyone involved in the meth operation. Walter tried to persuade Jesse to forgive and forget, but Jesse was adamant, declaring he'd buy a new car and continue cooking meth once discharged, threatening to rat out Walter and Saul if caught. Hearing this, the two stepped outside for a private chat. Saul believed that if Jesse continued to cook meth, it wouldn't be long before he got caught, which would spell trouble for him and Walter. Although Walter believed Jesse wouldn't betray him, Saul was clear-headed, suggesting that if Jesse didn't see reason, they might have to resort to drastic measures, implying murder. Hank was undergoing an interrogation by the review committee, where he detailed the sequence of events. When he began to explain what happened when he drove to Jesse's place, his lawyer interrupted, suggesting they end the discussion for the day. The news of Jesse's clean blood test and his decision to file a lawsuit were both unfavorable for Hank. After taking photos of Hank's bruised hands, the committee released him, but the Justice Department's investigation was still looming. Back at the office, Hank packed up his belongings and Marie came to pick him up. As the elevator doors closed with both inside, they stood stoically, but in the privacy of the moment, Hank broke down in tears, holding Marie. Despite his pride, Hank feared that Marie, known for her chattiness, might have already shared the incident with others. Indeed, Skyler, already informed, rushed to Walter's new house to see him living comfortably. She couldn't help but make some sarcastic remarks, musing that crime apparently pays well. However, she didn't come just to mock. She was there to ask Walter if he had heard about Hank's situation, concerned if Hank could trace things back to him. Walter assured her it was impossible, as Hank's career would be over due to Jesse's lawsuit. Skyler hoped Walter could persuade Jesse to drop the lawsuit, but Walter explained that he and Jesse were no longer on speaking terms. Afterward, Walter headed to the lab, only to find Gale had incorrectly set the temperature on the equipment. Walter reprimanded him, but Gale confidently referred to his notes, insisting that he had followed Walter's instructions and couldn't have made a mistake. It was clear Walter was being deliberately difficult, claiming the entire batch was ruined and had to be discarded. Afterward, Walter called Uncle Chicken, expressing his doubts about Gale's competence and stating that Jesse was a better fit as his assistant due to their rapport. After some persuasion, Uncle Chicken finally agreed. Walter visited Jesse in the hospital, asking him to resume his role as his lab assistant. Jesse scornfully rejected the offer, telling Walter to find someone else as he was done. Jesse stated that if Walter wanted to save Hank, there was no chance. Walter then told Jesse that everything would go back to the way it was, with a 50-50 profit share and a payout of $1.5 million for each of them upon completion. Walter thought this would sway Jesse, but he still refused. Jesse angrily declared that he wasn't rejecting the money, he was rejecting Walter. Ever since they met, Jesse had faced nothing but trouble. His girlfriend died, his friends died, and he felt more alone than ever, all while Walter only cared about himself, never considering Jesse's feelings. Jesse accused Walter of deeming him useless and even calling his blue meth garbage. Jesse's words left Walter speechless. Before leaving, Walter acknowledged that the meth Jesse produced was of high quality. As Walter drove home, Jesse called, having changed his mind, willing to continue their partnership. It seemed that Walter's last moment of recognition had an impact on Jesse after all. Jesse was easier to persuade than he thought. On the other side of town, the Bald brothers got in touch with an arms dealer, originally thinking they'd be buying heavy weaponry to take on Hank. It turned out they only purchased 2 bulletproof vests. The dealer boasted about the quality of the vests, claiming they were so good that he wore one himself. Talk is cheap, though, and the brothers decided to put his claims to the test by shooting him in the chest. Luckily, the vest lived up to the hype, and the dealer survived what would have otherwise been a deadly shot. Hank was gearing up for questioning by the Justice Department, and before he left, Marie urged him to tell the authorities that it was Jesse who threw the first punch, and that Hank was only reacting in self-defense. However, Hank wasn't willing to lie. He admitted that he was wrong to beat up Jesse. He confessed that after shooting Tuco, he had finally calmed down, only to be shaken up again by the severed head and tortoise incident. Since then, he's been on the verge of collapse, unable to find peace in his sleep. Hank gloomily accepted that his career in law enforcement might be at its end. Hank was suspended, and even his service weapon and badge were confiscated. As he was leaving, his boss told him the good news that Jesse had dropped the charges. This reignited a spark of hope in Hank. He bought a bouquet of flowers and a gift, planning to go home and celebrate with Marie. But just as he got into his car, he received a mysterious call warning him that someone was on their way to kill him and would be there in a minute. Hank was told to run for his life. Hank tried calling his colleagues for backup, but no one answered. His eyes scanned every figure that appeared nearby, and his hand went for his gun, only to remember it had been taken away. As the minute passed, the Bald brothers showed up, splitting up to corner him. Hank couldn't be sure they were the hitmen, but then someone in the rearview mirror shot out the back windshield of his car. Hank quickly threw the car in reverse, pinning one of the Bald assassins between 2 vehicles. The other assassin circled around and shot Hank in the side. However, by the time he reached the car, Hank had already exited from the other side. After rescuing his critically injured brother, the remaining assassin followed Hank's blood trail. Because he shot at bystanders, he ran out of bullets and was just about to reload when, with a shaky hand, he dropped the bullet. Hank seized the moment and charged, beating the assassin. Since the assassin was wearing a bulletproof vest, Hank's barrage did no harm. The assassin retaliated with 2 shots, and Hank, already hit by 4 bullets, fell and didn't get back up. The assassin only needed 1 more shot to finish Hank off, but instead of doing so, he went to grab an axe, intending to chop off Hank's head. However, Hank had managed to get the bullet that had been dropped. Before the assassin could swing the axe, Hank shot him in the head, ending his bald life. Jesse waited outside the hospital for Skinny Pete and the others to come pick him up. Just then, a critically injured Hank was rushed in by the doctors. Jesse couldn't believe it at first, and only came to his senses once he got into the car, a look of schadenfreude on his face. Back at the lab, Gale couldn't figure out why Walter had fired him. Walter could only offer the all-purpose reason that they were not in sync. At that moment, Jesse showed up. Gale was almost persuaded by Walter's explanation, but seeing the carefree Jesse made him doubt Walter's choices even more. He felt incredulous that he could lose his job to someone like that. Although Gale was resentful, he ultimately chose to leave. The lab was isolated from outside, with all signals blocked, so Walter was oblivious to what had happened to Hank. Upon learning the news from Jesse, he rushed to the hospital. By then, Marie and Skyler were already there. Hank's boss told Walter that all they knew was that the hitmen had tattoos associated with a drug trafficking gang. As for the reason behind the attack on Hank, the police were still unclear, but it was likely related to the case he was investigating. As for the hitmen, one was dead and the other was being treated upstairs. Hank's partner admired his bravery but accidentally mentioned that Hank's service weapon had been confiscated. Marie became agitated. Although the boss explained that confiscating Hank's gun was standard procedure because of the assault, Marie wasn't having any of it. She lashed out at them and even turned her anger towards Walter. If he hadn't bought illegal substances from Jesse, Hank would never have gotten on the trail, and this tragedy wouldn't have happened. Skyler stepped in to defend Walter, saying this wasn't Walter's fault. Meanwhile, with Walter away, Jesse could only idle around in the lab. Unable to contain himself, he called Walter, hoping he'd come back soon to work on their project, or else he'd start on his own. Walter quickly intervened, warning him not to mess around with the equipment as a novice. As Skyler approached, Walter hurriedly ended the call. At breakfast, Marie was in a foul mood and picked a fight, complaining that the forks in the hospital cafeteria were dirty. She questioned how a hospital with such poor hygiene standards could save lives. To calm Marie, Walter said that he himself had surgery at this hospital and was now living well. He assured her that Hank, being in better physical condition than him, would surely pull through. Hearing Walter's comforting words, Marie felt somewhat better. On the other side, Uncle Chicken received a call from the Bald brothers' bald boss. He asked if Uncle Chicken was aware that his men had run into trouble on his turf. Of course, Uncle Chicken knew about it. The boss suspected that his men changing their plans at the last minute had to have been someone else's doing. He suspected that someone was Uncle Chicken himself, but he didn't have any evidence. Naturally, Uncle Chicken denied everything. The boss then remarked that as long as the surviving hitman wasn't dead, the truth would come out eventually. This statement reminded Uncle Chicken, and he began to brew a new murder plan. At the hospital, the surgery finally came to an end. The doctors informed them that Hank was out of mortal danger, but his condition was not yet stable. Everyone refused to leave the hospital, opting to wait it out until Hank regained consciousness. Walter made some excuses and left the hospital. Once he reached the lobby, he saw Hank's fellow officers there. They had just donated blood for Hank. Walter wanted to leave quickly but was stopped by Hank's partner, who shared how everyone was gathered, talking about Hank's heroic fight against the two hitmen. Hank had become a true hero in everyone's eyes. Hank's partner mentioned the surviving hitman and asked if Walter wanted to see him, and so Walter and a group of officers arrived outside the patient's room. The hitman had miraculously survived but had lost his legs. He recognized Walter and started crawling towards the door. The police quickly subdued him. Walter, noticing the hitman's menacing glare, felt a chill down his spine. Back at the lab, Jesse was left to his own devices, unable to wait for Walter. Uncle Chicken's men began to suspect that this person might be an idiot. They questioned Jesse if he was still making drugs, prompting Jesse to contact Walter again, urging him to hurry back. At this moment, Walter's mind was elsewhere. He asked Jesse if Tuco had mentioned someone who could help him smuggle into Mexico. Jesse confirmed that they were Tuco's cousins. With that, Walter finally understood that the Bald brothers were after him for revenge. Soon after, Walter received a call from Uncle Chicken, inquiring about the progress of the drug production. He had to come up with various excuses to stall and said that he would deliver 400 pounds of the product by next Monday. In the evening, to gather intelligence on the Bald brothers, Walter approached Hank's partner. Before he could get any information, the partner's phone rang. It was Uncle Chicken himself, delivering fried chicken to everyone. Uncle Chicken was one of the sponsors of the DEA, a man full of justice. After Hank's incident, he even offered $10,000 to find eyewitnesses. Uncle Chicken stated that it was the least he could do. After Uncle Chicken left, Walter found an excuse to follow him. Seeing that Uncle Chicken had already sized him up, Walter felt unease. Currently, their cooperation was pleasant, but Walter wondered what Uncle Chicken was really planning. Walter asked if he knew the inside story of Hank's attack, to which Uncle Chicken did not respond, only mentioning that the surviving hitman wouldn't live for long. As soon as he finished speaking, the police rushed upstairs. The hitman was near death. Despite the doctor's efforts, it was in vain. In an inconspicuous corner, Mike quickly passed by, clearly linked to the hitman's death. After the death, the two assassins' boss called to threaten Uncle Chicken, saying he would not let this go. But just as he opened the door, he was sent straight to hell by police who had been waiting outside for a long time. In the end, Marie could finally visit the hospital room, and seeing her husband lying there unconscious was truly heartbreaking. Jesse and Walter cleared the air and reformed their drug-making partnership. Although Jesse was still the assistant, he was no longer blindly obedient to Walter, which meant their drug production wouldn't go as smoothly as before. Walter and Jesse worked day and night in the lab and finally exceeded their target. They packed the finished product, which was then distributed by Uncle Chicken's men to various locations. In the blink of an eye, the boxes of meth were divided into small packets. These packets were then hidden in plastic buckets of fried chicken seasoning. The last step was loading the trucks, and just like that, the meth was delivered to fried chicken branches. Although they completed a week's worth of work, Jesse couldn't be happy. In his view, the extra pound of meth they produced could have been kept back, allowing them to produce less next week. He thought Uncle Chicken should not benefit from this. Despite being a poor student, Jesse was sharp when it came to money. But Walter pointed out that after this job, they would both be millionaires. One should learn to be content. He gave advice, but it was uncertain whether Jesse would truly be content. Over at the hospital, Hank has come round, but he needs to rest in bed. His partner dropped by to see him and showed him a map indicating a sudden surge in the blue meth that had been dormant for 2 months. This proves that Hank's prior concerns were correct. Heisenberg is still at large. Before, Hank would have immediately followed up on this, but now he can only look on helplessly. Adding to Hank's confusion is the mysterious person who warned him to run a minute before the attack. With the voice disguised, Hank is clueless about who it might be. Hearing this, Walter falls into deep thought, seemingly onto something. Skyler senses Walter's unusual demeanor and asks him if Hank's attack is related to him. Walter quickly denies it, but Skyler is worried about potential danger. Despite his uncertainty, Walter reassures her that there's nothing to worry about. To confirm his suspicions, Walter meets with Uncle Chicken directly. He figures out that the initial target of the two bald cousins was him, directed towards Hank by someone else's manipulation, and that someone is Uncle Chicken. The reason for such a move is nothing but a scheme to use the DEA to eliminate the Mexican drug cartel, so Uncle Chicken can benefit from their downfall and monopolize the American drug market. Walter realizes that the person who tipped off Hank must be Uncle Chicken, acting out of concern that the cousins would kill him. Understanding the full picture, Walter doesn't hold a grudge against Uncle Chicken. In fact, he admits he would have done the same. Of course, Walter's accommodation of Uncle Chicken is driven by fear for his family's safety. Seeing through this, Uncle Chicken proposes extending their partnership from 3 months to a year, which means that Walter and Jesse could earn a total of $15 million. The more disadvantageous it is for Walter, but considering his family's safety, he has no real choice. On the way home, the thought of Hank's attack being his fault weighs heavily on Walter's conscience. The doctors need to perform a neurological test on Hank. They start with the soles of his feet, which show no response. Thankfully, there's still a reaction in the lower leg area, which means Hank's leg nerves are beginning to recover slowly. Whether he can return to normal is uncertain. Marie wants Hank to start physical therapy as soon as possible. If they go through medical insurance, the earliest they can start is next week, but Marie doesn't want to wait another day. However, compared to medical expenses, the cost of physical therapy is a real money pit. If they start immediately, the insurance company won't cover the costs. Marie is desperate to help Hank and isn't concerned about the expense. She just wants to find the best physical therapist right away. Saul, upon learning that partnering with Walter would surely be profitable, summons Jesse to a nail salon. He persuades him to invest some money to buy the salon, suggesting it as a front for laundering the drug money they would make. Jesse is initially uninterested and turns to leave, but Saul calls him back, painting the benefits of money laundering in the most captivating light. Jesse is no fool and realizes Saul just wants to earn a 5% commission. However, Jesse is only half right. While that rate applies to Walter, Saul plans to charge Jesse a 17% commission due to his youth and lack of experience. Feeling insulted, Jesse leaves without another word. Skyler is at home comforting Marie when her boss unexpectedly shows up. Skyler feels awkward, but Marie is oblivious to the tension between them. Taking advantage of Marie leaving to take a bath, the boss and Skyler whisper to each other. The boss can't help but reproach Skyler for neglecting him recently. Skyler, not in the mood for romantic issues, just wants him to leave quickly. Before leaving, the boss complains, questioning why they can't be openly together now that they're both single. Skyler suggests they talk about it at the office in a couple of days. Skyler's cold attitude toward the boss is partly because she regrets signing the divorce papers with Walter. As previously mentioned, Jesse is unhappy with being exploited by Uncle Chicken, and despite Walter's advice to be content, it clearly doesn't work. He has already started scheming. He gathers Skinny Pete and Badger to return to the streets. He eyes the surplus meth produced in the lab each week and falsely reports the pounds, pocketing the difference. How to sell this surplus without getting caught is the question. Selling on the streets is risky, so Jesse gets Skinny Pete and Badger to join the regular addiction support group meetings he attends. There, they mention the recent flood of blue meth, tantalizing the less resolute members of the group. Now they have their target audience for sales. The hospital has made an estimate of Hank's long-term physical therapy costs, the sum of which Marie can't possibly afford. Walter offers reassurance, telling her to ask if there's anything he can do to help. Encouraged by Walter's words, Skyler suggests that they should cover the costs. Hearing this, Walter nearly panics. Not because he's stingy, but because that money comes from illicit drug sales and can't be exposed. To avoid Marie's suspicion, Skyler fabricates a story. After Walter was diagnosed with cancer, he became addicted to gambling and miraculously cracked the system, winning a significant amount of money. Marie is concerned that Walter might overexert himself, but when he claims to have a 7-figure sum in the bank, even Skyler is shocked. She knew Walter had money, but not that much. In the end, Marie agrees to accept their help, but with one condition that Hank and Junior must never find out. Jesse covertly takes the extra meth leftovers and sells them. Because the amount is so small, most people wouldn't notice, but Walter isn't most people. His meticulous calculations reveal that the finished product is off by roughly 0.25 to 0.5 pounds. Jesse quickly makes excuses, asking if Walter accounted for overflow and evaporation, as well as the residue left in the equipment. However, Walter doesn't buy these possibilities. He senses there's a problem. Just as he's about to recheck the numbers, a fly intrudes, causing a distraction. Walter tries to swat it, but fails, and the fly lands on the table behind him. Walter then resumes his task, picking up a book and attempting to hit the fly when it's off guard, but he misses again. The fly continues to buzz around the large lab, with Walter in hot pursuit. Eventually, the fly lands on a light bulb on the ceiling. Walter takes off a shoe and hurls it at the fly, smashing the bulb and getting the shoe stuck up there, but the fly escapes. Walter struggled to knock his shoe down with a broom. Just then, he sees the fly resting on the railing. As he reaches out to hit the fly, he slips and falls. The fly now decides to land on Walter's glasses. The next morning, Jesse pulls up to the laundry front in his car and notices a cigarette butt stained with lipstick on the dashboard, a memento left by Jane. It brings back memories of his lost love. Because Walter has sealed the lab door with a strip of cloth, Jesse struggles to open it. A flustered Walter informs him that a contaminant has appeared in the lab. Jesse gets nervous, wondering if it's dangerous and if he should wear a gas mask. Walter shows him the fly-catching contraption he made the night before and assures him that will be enough. Jesse is confused and asks what the contaminant is exactly. Learning that it's just a fly, he's even more bewildered, thinking this is an overreaction. As the time to cook meth approached, Jesse was ready to pour the raw materials into the equipment, but was stopped by Walter. He insisted that they couldn't proceed with the cook until the fly was dead. Jesse was speechless. He hadn't even seen a fly. Walter was convinced the fly was still hiding somewhere in the lab. Jesse planned to start cooking behind Walter's back, but he was caught red-handed. Infuriated, Walter hit Jesse with the fly-catching tool, making him jump with anger. At that moment, Walter called out to Jesse. Turns out the fly was on his own face and he wanted Jesse to take swift action. Jesse felt a twisted satisfaction at the chance to legitimately hit Walter, so he struck hard at his face. But he missed the fly and instead left Walter's head buzzing. Seeing Jesse's confusion, Walter explained that they couldn't let a single rat dropping ruin the whole pot of stew. The fly could contaminate the lab's environment, and they might even lose everything because of it. However, Jesse still didn't get it and suggested that Walter was too tired and should maybe get some fresh air outside the lab. But as soon as he stepped out, Walter would lock the door, determined not to rest until the fly was caught. Not long after, the power to the lab was cut. It's Jesse's doing. With no choice, Walter had to let him in. This time, Jesse decided to help him kill the fly, even buying insecticide and fly paper. Seeing the insecticide, Walter couldn't help but criticize Jesse because they would only cause more contamination. In the end, they hung many sticky traps around the lab and waited quietly for the fly to ensnare itself. As the day went on, Jesse didn't want Walter to keep suffering, so he secretly spiked his coffee with a sleeping pill. While drinking the coffee, Walter opened up about his feelings. According to his original plan, he only needed to save enough money for his wife and children, and then he could find a place to wait for death. But plans never keep up with changes. His health condition began to improve, and even his meth cooking activities were discovered by his wife. Walter pondered that the turning point was on the night he went to see Jesse with an excuse to give Jesse the drug money. Leaving the store, he met Jane's father at a bar. When he heard him say never to give up on family, everything started to change. Not bearing to see Jesse fall, Walter went back to him, an action that even led to Jane's death. After that, he felt he had changed. If he had been able to give up on Jesse back then, so many things wouldn't have happened afterward. The sleeping pill began to take effect and Walter started to feel drowsy. Fortunately, he didn't blurt out that he had watched Jane die. Just then, the sound of the fly came from above. Walter was no longer capable, but Jesse volunteered and finally killed the fly after much effort. But Walter was already asleep and didn't witness it. Jesse finished cooking the meth alone, and by the time Walter woke up, it was already daylight. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Walter reminded Jesse not to steal any product again. If someone found out, he wouldn't be able to save him. Some believe this fly-swatting part is legendary, using the fly as a metaphor for Walter's overwhelming psychological pressure. Jane's death, the consequent plane crash, and Hank's attack have all become stains on Walter's humanity, which continue to haunt him. In addition to dealing with the omnipotent Uncle Chicken, he couldn't afford any mistakes. Otherwise, it would endanger his family. Guilt, panic, and psychological shadows linger in Walter's mind just like the fly, impossible to get rid of. Walter not witnessing the fly's death symbolizes that he will never be able to let go of this for the rest of his life. His conscience will always be tormented, and the stain will forever exist in him. The buzzing sound of a fly that Walter hears as he tries to sleep at night might just be a testament to this. The scene shifts to Hank beginning his rehabilitation training in the hospital, which was proving to be difficult. He became irritable without even successfully taking a step forward. Marie and Junior were there to support Hank, but he didn't appreciate it, lashing out at them. Eventually, Skyler and her son had to leave the room. Marie followed them out and handed this week's hospital bill to Skyler. Upon opening it, it was clear the amount was substantial, and new bills would arrive every week. Marie checked with Skyler to make sure there was really no problem, to which Skyler just assured her that they could totally afford it. In the lab, Jesse and Walter were focused on making meth. To prevent Jesse from skimming, Walter took over the weighing process, which really annoyed Jesse. He complained that Walter just treated him like a thief. As Jesse became more agitated, Walter signaled him to keep quiet, reminding him that the walls have ears. At the addiction recovery support group, a few newcomers showed up, among them a woman named Andrea, who caught Jesse's attention. During the break, Jesse told Badger and Skinny Pete that Walter had been keeping a tight watch on him, making it impossible for him to skim any meth. Jesse was worried about a shortage of supply, but Badger mentioned how hard it was to sell drugs to recovering addicts. They had only managed to sell less than 2 grams so far. Skinny Pete added that the group seemed to be full of positive energy, with everyone wanting to turn over a new leaf. Seeing his friends weren't helpful, Jesse decided to take matters into his own hands and targeted the newcomer, Andrea. Their relationship heated up at Andrea's house, not because Jesse wanted to exploit her for drug sales, he genuinely liked her. However, he didn't forget to push his blue meth. Just as Andrea was about to relapse, there was a knock at the door. It was her 6-year-old son. Jessie has always been kind to children. Maybe because of her son, Jesse couldn't bring himself to sell meth to Andrea. That evening, Skyler's family gathered together. Junior handed over his new temporary driving permit to his father, hinting it was time to think about buying him a car. After Junior went to his room, Walter handed Skyler a check to cover Hank's bills. Skyler was worried it was drug money and that they'd be in trouble if caught. Walter assured her there was no problem and that they had a professional helping them. However, Skyler insisted on meeting this expert, who turned out to be the lawyer Saul. Saul explained the money laundering process, which involved collaborating with casino managers to fake casino losses. They would then claim Walter's money came from casino winnings. Though this wasn't a long-term plan, Saul already had a new idea, proposing Walter could invest in a business. Saul thought a laser tag arena was a good choice. Skyler was stunned, as that seemed totally out of character for Walter, a respectable high school chemistry teacher. But Saul disagreed, saying that as a scientist, Walter would naturally love lasers. When Skyler continued to question his expertise, Saul got defensive, insisting he was the money laundering expert and that she should not interfere. In the end, they parted on bad terms. On the way home, Walter hoped Skyler would trust Saul. He himself was too deep in the mire to get out, but he wanted Skyler to stay clear of it. To his surprise, Skyler admitted that whether she liked it or not, she was already an accomplice. As they spoke, they drove to a familiar place, the car wash where Walter had worked part-time. Investing in the car wash as a means of laundering money seemed more plausible than a laser tag facility. After all, Walter had 4 years' experience there, which could provide him with a good cover story. But Walter didn't respond immediately. The next day, he took Saul to see the place in person. Undeniably, the car wash suited Walter well. But Saul mentioned that the most crucial aspect of the laundering process was the cooperation of the business owner. The owner of the laser tag facility was known to be compliant with managing a front operation, but the same couldn't be said for the car wash's current owner. What if he didn't agree to launder money? Back home, Walter told Skyler that the car wash owner might not be suitable. He seemed to lean towards investing in the laser tag facility, given the owner's expertise in money laundering. Skyler, however, didn't give in. She even considered running the business herself. Being an accountant, money laundering didn't seem a difficult task for her. Walter rejected her offer, not wanting her to get involved. But Skyler saw it differently. They were a couple, and she was implicated whether they liked it or not. When Walter mentioned that they were divorced, Skyler countered that she hadn't signed the divorce papers yet, so they were still legally married. Moreover, the law doesn't allow one spouse to testify against the other, making her the perfect candidate to run the car wash. Turning to Jesse, his group continued to attend the addiction recovery support group. Unexpectedly, Badger and Skinny Pete were influenced by the group and started to reform. To win over Andrea, Jesse took her and her son out to dinner. Despite Jesse's efforts to entertain her son, the child was unimpressed, claiming Jesse wasn't as fun as Thomas. Curious, Jesse asked who Thomas was. Andrea hesitated, but then revealed Tomas was her estranged younger brother. After dinner back at home, Jesse and Andrea grew closer in bed. Afterwards, Andrea inquired if Jesse had any more blue meth. Jesse was shocked, criticizing her mothering. Andrea bristled, saying as a single mother no one knew what she'd been through, but she'd never let Tomas's tragedy happen to her son. Now intrigued, Jesse asked what had happened to Tomas. Andrea shared that their neighborhood was gang-controlled and that her brother Tomas had been caught up in it without parental supervision. Tomas was corrupted, and to be initiated into the gang, was ordered to shoot a drug dealer at the street corner. Jesse realized the significance. The location of the murder was the same place where Combo had been killed. To confirm his hunch, Jesse asked when Thomas had committed the murder. Learning that it was a few months ago, he knew the timing matched. Jesse was left with a heavy heart, piecing together the grim reality. The day after, Jesse arrived at the street where Combo had met his fate. Sure enough, he encountered Tomas there. The heartless gang had actually used him to spread illegal substances. 2 gang members sat in a car nearby, waiting to collect their money. When Jesse left, a rare flash of menace sparkled in his eyes. That day, Jesse and Walter were working in the lab when they suddenly received a call from Uncle Chicken. He invited Walter over to his house. The purpose behind the invitation was unclear. In the evening, Walter paid a visit. Uncle Chicken was hospitable and even prepared dinner himself. At the dinner table, he advised Walter to learn to live like the wealthy. However, that wasn't the main point. Uncle Chicken wanted to warn Walter about something. Don't make the same mistake twice. He was specifically referring to something done by Jesse. Whether Uncle Chicken had discovered Jesse's drug theft was still uncertain. A prostitute was working hard every day in her trade, but the money she earned was only enough to buy a little bit of meth. The people selling drugs to the prostitute were the same gang members who had instructed Tomas to commit murder. Jesse watched all of this from a distance, seemingly with a plan forming in his mind. Meanwhile, Walter was busy teaching Junior how to drive. After the driving lesson, Walter dropped his son off at home. Skyler wanted to discuss the car wash business again. It was clear that she was eager to join in, even crafting a story as a cover. They would say Walter won money gambling and then invested it in the car wash, where she would be employed as an accountant. This way, the government wouldn't suspect a thing. However, the logical Walter pointed out a flaw in the story. Although they hadn't divorced, they were living apart. If a couple was in discord, why would they cooperate to run a car wash? Walter suggested moving back home to make it appear they had reconciled, which would make the story more credible. Unexpectedly, Skyler disagreed. After some negotiation, Walter managed to secure the opportunity to come over for dinner 4 times a week. While cooking meth one day, Jesse invited Walter to grab a drink that night. Walter wasn't feeling it, but a piercing look from Jesse got the message across. At the bar that evening, Jesse showed Walter the meth he bought from some gang members the day before. Placing it on the table, he asked if it was their own product. It indeed was. Jesse realized these gang members were connected to Uncle Chicken, but driven by the desire to avenge his friend, he brushed off the danger. He hoped Walter would help him make ricin, to take out the gang members without raising suspicion, confident Uncle Chicken wouldn't suspect him. Walter didn't endorse the plan and tried to discourage Jesse from acting impulsively, cautioning that not even divine intervention could save him if Uncle Chicken got wind of it. But Jesse believed his murder scheme was flawless. The prostitute would routinely buy drugs from the gang and deliver them burgers. All Jesse had to do was lace the burgers with poison to kill them off quietly. But Walter refused to participate because the gang was not on their trail, and there was no need to risk it, especially after Uncle Chicken's warning, which made Walter all the more hesitant. Seeing Walter wouldn't be swayed, Jesse stormed out. Anxious about Jesse going rogue, Walter turned to Saul for help, hoping to get Jesse arrested to cool off before releasing him. Typically, such a job would be for the trouble fixer, Mike. But that night, Mike showed up, stating the plan to jail Jesse was a no-go. Walter was confused as the terms had already been set with Saul, but Mike revealed his true boss wasn't Saul but Uncle Chicken, and he certainly wouldn't let his employee be imprisoned. Moreover, Uncle Chicken would be displeased if he discovered the motive, and Mike was certain Uncle Chicken would know it as nothing ever slipped by him. Jesse was recklessly testing his limits. Mike advised against risking their relatively safe current existence because of Jesse. Mike then recounted his own tale. When he was a cop dealing with a domestic abuse case, the victim wouldn't press charges, leaving the police helpless. Eventually, Mike lost patience, shoved a gun in the abuser's mouth, and scared him to the core. The abuser vowed never to hit his wife again. Mike believed him and let him go, but 2 weeks later, the woman was killed by her husband. Mike shared this story to make Walter realize hesitation leads to chaos. Jesse had indeed secretly purchased some ricin and approached the prostitute to discuss a murder plot. But the idea of murder terrified her chicken body. However, after considerable persuasion from Jesse and the lure of a large bag of blue meth, the prostitute finally agreed to help. The two drove to a street corner, everything proceeding according to plan. However, they only saw Thomas cycling around. The gang members were nowhere to be seen. At that moment, Mike and another one of Uncle Chicken's men appeared, sending the prostitute away and taking Jesse to Uncle Chicken's chicken farm, where Walter and the gang members were present. Uncle Chicken acknowledged that his men killing Jesse's friend was wrong, but also blamed the friend for selling on his territory. Jesse, angry, glanced at Walter, suspecting him of snitching. Uncle Chicken sent the gang members outside and confronted Jesse, stating that if it weren't for Walter's sake, Jesse wouldn't even know how he died. He then instructed Jesse to make peace with the gang members, declaring the matter settled without further pursuit. However, Jesse stood his ground, condemning the gang members for involving children in their business and even for murder. Jesse had hoped Walter would back him up, but Walter remained silent. Afterwards, Uncle Chicken had his men called back in, and under his intimidating presence, Jesse was forced to reconcile. Perhaps impressed by Jesse's courage, Uncle Chicken ordered his men not to use children anymore. Just when it seemed things were resolved, tragedy struck. Andrea and Jesse were together when she received a call from the police station, informing her that her brother, Tomas, had been found dead in the street. Jesse was shocked. It was clearly a deliberate act of retaliation by the gang members. The next day, Jesse skipped work and wasn't seen until that evening. Walter, having seen the news of Thomas's murder, realized the gravity of the situation. Although Mike had already tried to advise him, Walter couldn't bear to watch Jesse head towards his own doom. He skipped dinner with his family and rushed out to find Jesse. Meanwhile, Jesse planned to take action under the cover of darkness. To bolster his courage, he took a hit before getting out of the car. Then, armed with a gun, he went to confront the gang members, but it seemed like they had anticipated Jesse's arrival and were prepared for him. At that moment, a car sped towards the gang members, hitting one and causing him severe injury, while another was caught under the wheels and died instantly. The driver was none other than Walter. He finished off the barely alive gang member, leaving Jesse stunned. Walter then urged Jesse to leave the scene quickly. As Mike had said, if Walter couldn't let go of Jesse, he would eventually bring trouble upon himself. Following Walter's advice, Jesse fled into the night. Meanwhile, Walter drove out to the wilderness, seemingly waiting for someone. After an unknown period, a car approached him and stopped nearby. The occupants were Mike, Uncle Chicken, and another associate. Mike called Walter to step out of the car and walk over to them. Uncle Chicken inquired about Walter's health, asking if his illness had worsened, causing him to lose his mind and take such actions. Although Mike had cleaned up Walter's mess, Uncle Chicken was understandably shaken. Walter's actions could have exposed them all. In response to the accountability, Walter explained that it was his two men who killed Tomas, and Jesse was just acting in the name of justice. Uncle Chicken believed that he could have handled the situation instead of Jesse taking matters into his own hands. Walter suggested Jesse might suspect Uncle Chicken was the mastermind behind it all. As for Jesse's whereabouts, he had no idea. Uncle Chicken's face turned colors at these words. Given the circumstances, Walter offered two solutions. The first was to kill him right there and then spend a lot of time looking for Jesse. The second was to forget Jesse and continue their partnership. Uncle Chicken accepted the second option, but on the condition that he would decide on the lab assistant. Later, Walter arrived at the lab, only to find the locks had been changed. The new assistant is Gale, who Walter had previously dismissed. He opened the door from the inside, creating an awkward situation. In the evening, Mike caused a short circuit in the power lines and then snuck into a chemical supply warehouse. There, he shot and killed 4 unidentified individuals. It turned out that the warehouse's supplies were intended for Uncle Chicken's drug production. These people were attempting to intercept the goods. Mike presented the passports of the 4 men to Uncle Chicken, speculating that they had come from Laredo and that they weren't the most capable bunch. Uncle Chicken pondered for a moment and concluded they were targeting a vulnerability. He then inquired about the whereabouts of Jesse, to which Mike replied that he was still investigating. In the lab, Walter and Gale were working intently, which was different from before because Uncle Chicken's men were supervising the entire operation. Walter told Gale that the previous assistant had made some minor mistakes. Gale expressed his hope for a pleasant collaboration, saying he would do as instructed and hoped Walter could mentor him. Walter realized that Gale was sent by Uncle Chicken to replace him, and if that happened, he would lose his value. After work, Gale went home and was humming a tune while watering his smelly plants when Uncle Chicken unexpectedly paid him a visit to discuss an urgent matter. He asked Gale how long it would take for him to produce drugs independently. Gale was puzzled by the question, so Uncle Chicken got straight to the point, saying Walter became a drug producer because he had cancer and he worried that Walter didn't have much time left. The drug production must continue, so someone had to succeed Walter. Gale mentioned that he might need to produce a few more batches with Walter, as mastering his level of expertise was not easy. Uncle Chicken was clearly dissatisfied with this answer, and his cold gaze was chilling. Gale quickly changed his response to just 1 or 2 more batches. Uncle Chicken's gaze grew even colder, frightening Gale into altering his answer again, stating that just 1 more batch would suffice. Hearing this, Uncle Chicken patted Gale on the thigh, expressing his confidence in Gale's abilities. The next day, Gale and Walter were together cleaning the drug manufacturing equipment. Gale couldn't help but want to ask about Walter's illness, but before he could speak up, Uncle Chicken's henchman came over, worried that Gale might slip up. This unnatural behavior caught Walter's attention, making him realize that Uncle Chicken was eager to dispense with him. Mike found Saul and pressed him for Jesse's whereabouts. Saul refused to divulge anything, insisting that as a lawyer, client confidentiality was paramount. Without it, he wouldn't be able to continue in his profession. Seeing Saul's firm stance, Mike threatened that if Saul didn't talk, he'd send him to meet his maker. Saul quickly changed his tune, telling Mike that Jesse's address was written in a notebook and suggesting he go get a coffee while Mike searched for it on the table, making it clear that whatever was found wasn't his responsibility. Ultimately, Mike obtained Jesse's location. Saul took Walter to the laser tag store, and on the ride there, the two of them kept talking about investments, a conversation meant for Uncle Chicken's men to overhear because Saul's car was bugged, and Uncle Chicken's men were monitoring them from a distance. Arriving at the laser tag store, Saul became unsettled. Not only was his car bugged, but Mike had also come to issue death threats, demanding more money if Walter and Jesse survived their ordeal. Unexpectedly, Jesse hadn't run far and was hiding right in the laser tag store. The address Saul had let Mike find was a fake one. He reminded Walter and Jesse that Mike was on to them, and that they had at most 24 hours before he realized the address was fake to sort out their troubles. Although Saul loved money, he maintained his professional ethics and never betrayed Walter and Jesse from start to finish. Walter knew that Gale had mastered the core drug production techniques. If he hadn't been so cautious, Uncle Chicken probably would have gotten rid of him long ago. Walter hoped Jesse would take care of Gale, but not only was Jesse unable to do so, he instead urged Walter to turn himself into the police, give up Uncle Chicken, and thus save his own life while eliminating Uncle Chicken. Jesse planned to hide away where no one could find him, seeing it as a win-win. However, Walter disagreed. He insisted that the drug production must continue and supply not be interrupted. There was another way to stay alive, that is to eliminate Gale, making himself an irreplaceable top drug producer in Uncle Chicken's operation, thus securing a bargaining chip for his life. Then he would find a way to save Jesse. Since Jesse was unwilling to act, Walter said he would do it himself. If it weren't for the fact that he was constantly monitored, he would have already taken care of Gale in the lab, making it look like an accidental death. Jesse tried to persuade him not to kill again, but Walter knew it was a matter of life and death between him and Gale. He instructed Jesse to secretly follow Gale and find out his address, leaving the murder to Walter. While Walter was soothing his daughter, Jesse called to give Gale's address. Walter decided to take action that evening. But just as he stepped out, he was confronted by Uncle Chicken's henchmen, claiming there had been a chemical leak in the lab that Walter needed to address. Walter tried to follow in his own car so he could alert Jesse, but the henchmen refused. It seemed Uncle Chicken had caught on to Walter's murderous scheme. At the lab, Walter found Mike waiting and realized Uncle Chicken was ready to deal with him. He pleaded with Mike for a chance, offering to trade Jesse's life for his own. Jesse was in the city, albeit with no fixed abode. A phone call to lure him out would suffice. Mike agreed. A nervous Walter made the call, quickly explaining that he couldn't act and Jesse must be the one to do it. Mike sensed something was amiss and snatched the phone away, but it was already too late. Enraged, he and his men pointed their guns at Walter. But Walter remained calm. He was about to become the only drug master. When Walter disclosed Gale's address, Mike anticipated danger for Gale. Uncle Chicken's men hurriedly left, while Mike rushed to warn Gale. But Gale had set his phone to vibrate and had music playing in the room, so he didn't hear the call. Soon, Jesse was knocking on Gale's door. Tears welled up in Jesse's eyes. He would never kill Gale if it weren't to save Walter. Faced with Gail's pleas, Jesse was torn, but ultimately he pulled the trigger. Gail's death is indeed lamentable. After all, he was merely a tool in Uncle Chicken's hands, a casualty in the struggle between Walter and Uncle Chicken. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.